Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nadine Groenig, and I am the Tribal Outreach Coordinator for Save Our Schools Arizona. I'm also the CEO for the Southwestern Institute for the Education of Native Americans. Goatsi Hiname Sutsietsa. I am also a member of the Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. And welcome to our first broadcast of Indigenous Perspectives on Facebook Live. I would love to introduce you to our panel speakers today. Our first one is Arizona State Senator Jamescita Peshlakai. She's Arizona's first Indigenous female state senator. She is serving in her second term in the Arizona Senate after previously being elected to the House of Representatives. Under her leadership, historic bipartisan accomplishments include passage of Arizona's Native American Day, a recognized state holiday, passage of the Affordable Health Care Act, passage of state aviation funding for tribal airports, and negotiating in the teacher pay increase legislation of 2018. Senator Peshlakai has the knowledge, experience, and leadership skills to restore and increase public education funding, advocate for affordable health care, improve public safety, and protect Arizona's most vulnerable populations. She believes that investing in our children's future should not include taxpayer dollars going to for-profit prisons or private schools with no oversight or accountability to taxpayers. And our second panelist is Brian Garcia. Brian is a member of the Pascoyaqui tribe. He serves as vice president on the governing board of the Tempe Union High School District, where he represents 160,000 residents and 13,000 students. Brian holds a bachelor's degree in global studies, a master's of legal studies, and a Juris Doctorate of Law from the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. Through his programs, Brian has worked and studied in London, Paris, Milan, and Cuba. Before starting law school, he was the outreach coordinator for Congresswoman Kirsten Sinema. He has also served as a child advocate for the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights. In addition, he has mentored students through Inspire Arizona and worked with the Human Rights Campaign Arizona Steering Committee as the political co-chair. Brian is passionate about ensuring reflective representation in all levels of government. So welcome, both of you. Senator Peshlakai, would you like to say a couple of words of greeting?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for Save Our Schools for hosting this very important Facebook Live event. And it's critical that we put information out at this time for all Arizonans and their families and school-aged children. My name is Jamescita Peshlakai, and I'm going to introduce myself in Navajo. Yat Ashik Edoshit the Nashas, Twish Zanish, Satkan Taken, Tidiego by Henson Qua, Shaho Agi, Shea Jamescita May, Peshlakai, the Shijanido, Tratne Satin Shle, Kenji Cheatney, Bashes Chain, Twitter Cheatney, Bashes Che, Tenjakine, Dashanella. And my clans are, I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, Dene, we call ourselves. My clans are Tangle people, born for the Red House clan. Maternal grandfathers are Bitterwater clan, and paternal grandfathers are the Cliff Dweller clan. And I've been in the legislature now for a total of 3 terms, 6 years. And I sit on the Higher Education Workforce Development Committee, Transportation, and Public Safety. And I'm the ranking member for Natural Resources, Energy, and Environment. And right now, thank you, Nadine, for sharing the work that I've done previously. And right now, this past session, we've faced great challenges, and this event helps put it back out there into the news, even though we're in the midst of the pandemic. So I'm the first Native American woman in the Arizona State Senate, like you said, and it only took 106 years. And one of the things that we all need to do is encourage our young people to start looking into running for office, and we need to be helping them and supporting them. And my legislative district is District number 7, which is in probably about 1/3 of the state of Arizona. It starts from Lake Mead and the entirety of the Grand Canyon, all the way to Four Corners, and then south over the San Carlos and White Mountains, and just south of Globe, north of Tucson. It's the largest legislative district in the country for a state official. My seatmates are Orlando Teller and Myron Sosi, and you can understand the huge geographic area that we have to travel. But this area, District 7, has 8 of the 22 tribes in Arizona in it. And if we don't have tribal representation at the state legislature or on up to federal or county and city councils, then our voices are lost. And so I always encourage folks to run for office. And part of that, getting our leadership ready, is education. If our children are not educated and they're not prepared with social studies, history, government, including tribal education, we're not setting the next leaders up for the next generations. And that's what we have to fight for. And I'm really happy that we are all doing this event. And I hope that we inspire so many people to get on the work that we're doing on our bandwagon, and let's knock it out of the park as far as creating opportunity, life, liberty, and happiness for our Indigenous children here in Arizona.
Thank you so much, Senator Peshlakai. Of course, as the former Director of Indian Education at the state level and being at the Arizona Department of Education for almost 18 years, I totally agree with you about the need to educate, our kids and to get more involved politically. So I see that Dr. Gabriel Trujillo, our third panelist, has joined us now. And Brian, I will give you a chance to greet everyone, but let me go ahead and read Dr. Trujillo's bio for you. He is the superintendent of the Tucson Unified School District. He is a lifelong educator currently in his 23rd year of service in public education. He started as a teacher at both the elementary and secondary levels in the areas of English and as a second language and English language arts. Dr. Trujillo later moved into school and district level administration, including as assistant superintendent in the Tucson Unified School District. For his work as the principal of Trevor G. Brown High School in the Phoenix Union High School District, the largest comprehensive high school in Phoenix, he was recognized as a Rodell Foundation Exemplary Principal finalist in 2014 and was awarded the Phoenix Union High School District's Administrator of the Year Award in 2015 for his leadership. Tucson Unified has over 3,000 Native American students, predominantly Tohono O'odham and Pasquayaqui, representing a student population of around 8%. So welcome, Dr. Trujillo.
Yes, welcome. And first of all, it's a privilege to be here. Anytime Save Our Schools needs anything from me, I'm there. You are a true angel on the shoulders of public education. You're always the first to stand and defend our public schools. So I appreciate everything that your organization does. In Tucson Unified, we are home to 3,000 Native American students, predominantly Pasquayaqui and Tohono O'odham. We currently serve, when you look at our Native American student population, we're about 45%, almost 50% are Pasquayaqui. We're also home to Pasquayaqui, the Pasquayaqui Reservation, which encompasses just about the entirety of the southwestern portion of our district. And one of the things that I think is important when we're talking about services to Native American students, I think, is the recognition of historical trauma and how that historical trauma has affected generations and generations of the families of the students that we've served, and how that historical trauma has manifested certain economic outcomes that have afflicted the communities that are in our districts. And I think it's the responsibility of the system, of the school district, to respond accordingly, not just through a general recognition of this issue, but also through resource deployment, through access and opportunity to programs through an equity lens. I think through the partnerships that we establish, the relationships that we establish with the different tribal nations that we serve, that allows them to have a seat at the table with leadership decisions, and then also the relationships that the school district establishes with the families in the communities, I think are crucial starting points for any school district that seeks to address a lot of the academic deficiencies and gaps that exist for Native American students and our Indigenous students, and quite frankly, everybody else. I know I say this a lot. In Tucson Unified, we're one of the only districts in the nation still under an active desegregation order for two plaintiff class groups, our Latinx kids and our African American students. When you compare their outcomes with attendance, with academic proficiency and achievement, with graduation, with college going, and certainly with the extent to which they're exposed to exclusionary discipline like suspensions, or even the representation in special education, those outcomes are significantly better and on a more positive trajectory than for our Native American students. Oftentimes, I challenge our leaders to think about this forgotten group of students that historically, not just in the recent past, but in the last 30 or 40, 50 years, even here in the Tucson Unified community, has not received the resources, the access and opportunities on a systemic level that we are trying to take care of now. So very, very important, and I'm glad I have this opportunity to speak on their behalf here today for you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and really appreciate your kind words about Save Our Schools Arizona. We are trying our best to save our schools, our public schools, from the privatization that a lot of people on a national level are really pushing, and to make money, frankly, off of people who just can't necessarily afford to lose the money, especially our school districts that are serving underserved populations like our Native Americans on reservations or rural areas. So thank you so much for that. And by the way, I grew up in Tucson. I'm from New Mexico, but I grew up in Tucson, very near the Pasco Yaqui reservation. So I know the area you're talking about. I graduated from Cholla High School. I won't tell you what year.
Cholla Charger, right?
Yes, go Chargers. So that brings us kind of around back to Brian, who is a member of the Pasco Yaqui tribe. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and greet everybody and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and thanks to all the panelists joining this discussion, and thank you to SOS Arizona. It feels great to have the discussion about Indigenous students and the issues around education. As Nadine said, my name is Brian Garcia. I'm a member of the Pasco Yaqui tribe of Arizona. My roots are actually from the tribe, from the Sonora side of the tribe in Mexico, from the pueblos. And so for me to decide to run for public office and ultimately to serve on the Tempe Union School Board was really rooted in representation. Our board has been around since 1908, and really no one that has Native roots has represented us on the board. And so it was really special and important and unique for us to have that perspective, because we know that without that representation, issues kind of get lost and forgotten. And so I'm really proud that we're able to focus on Native issues and obviously focus on trauma and the success of our Native students. And we know that our Native students can succeed and thrive in supportive environments. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, due to compounded effects like lack of running water, electricity, housing challenges, transportation, lack of technology, access to internet, and that infrastructure in general, the academics do suffer because we don't have that lack of foundation. And one thing that I really wanted to highlight is, as Senator Peshlakai mentioned, we have 22 federally recognized tribes in Arizona, each with a unique set of challenges, and that no one size fits all. And, so much of the needs of Flagstaff are different from those of Yuma, Globe, and Phoenix and Tempe. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all and really recognize that it's taken a while for all of us to get to this point. I'm grateful for Senator Peshlakai's leadership and others that have led the way for individuals like me to even have the opportunity to serve on in these capacities. And 72 years ago today, in 1948, Native people in Arizona finally secured the right to vote, when it should have been way earlier, along with the rest of the country. And so we know that we still have a long ways to go, but we're up for the challenge and ultimately the success of our students and our tribal nations.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So, as I mentioned, I was the Director of Indian Education for the state of Arizona, and my last report on the state of education and Indian education in Arizona came out in 2019 for the previous school year. And so, you all have talked about academic achievement and the challenges that our Native students have on reservations or even in urban areas, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But this is Indigenous perspectives, and I want to we're very fortunate to have the perspectives of a state legislator, a superintendent of are you the second or third largest school district in the state?
Right now we're second, and we're in the top 5.
Right, and Mesa would be the biggest, right?
Yeah. Mesa's the biggest, and then us, and then you got like Chandler and Paradise Valley, I think, is after.
Okay, so, and then of course the governing board member. So a lot of the work that I've tried to do over the years is to educate all of those levels and more, parents, etc. So in the report, I have a lot of data about academic achievement. And you're so right. I just want to read a couple of stats and then I'll ask our first question. So for the report separates high density schools from low density schools. So high density schools are those that have 25% or more Native American enrollment. And so for the students proficient in English language arts, in high density schools, Native Americans were 15%. And that's in comparison to the highest rate of proficient for Asian students at 51%. So you can see a huge gap there between our Native students and those students that are doing the best. And then they're followed by, tied at 22% with Hispanic, Latino, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. And then African American is at 27%. And then when you look at the low density, it's not much better. 23% for Native Americans, 30% for Hispanic and Latino students. That's for English language arts. And for math, we have Native Americans at 18%, so that's very low. And the next is Hispanic and Latinos at 21% and African Americans at 22%. So given that data, and that's just academic achievement data for 2 different areas. You also mentioned, Dr. Trujillo, the higher rates of discipline among our students of color, and other challenges like inadequate curriculum, etc. So how can we support Native American students in an educational system that lacks equity, often disciplines at higher rates than other students, disciplines Native students at higher rates than other students, provides inadequate curriculum, and continues to reduce state and federal funding? So let me address that first to Senator Peshlakai. I know you're working hard with your counterparts in the state legislature. You're trying to get funding for students across the state. You're trying to get our Native American students what they need. I know you fought for getting funding for the Office of Indian Education when I was in that position, which is very much appreciated. It didn't happen. So let's see from the perspective of a state legislator, what you think we can do as a state, or anybody on listening in today. What can we do to help in this situation? You're on mute, I think.
Thank you for that question, Nadine. I will be running that bill again. And Arizona, unfortunately, is behind everybody. And starting at the very local level, we need to train our school boards and support them and help them feel empowered. Right now, I have school boards, administrators, superintendents that are calling my office because there's no national or state way forward right now through pandemic times. And it just hurts our Native American students even more than it was before. Even if I was to pass that, draft that, sponsor that legislation again, and it was to move forward, we have a whole nother set of problems because of COVID-19, the reopening of schools. Every single person that I know on tribal lands, our children are our lives. We're like mama bears. And I have not heard one person say, I'm sending my child back to the first day of school. Nobody wants to do that. So we have to create that path forward for everybody, for that opportunity. And our children are behind again now in this pandemic situation because some schools have the opportunity, most American schools have the opportunity to do something virtually. But in tribal areas, a lot of people don't have infrastructure, no running water, no electricity. And if you're, if somebody in your family is COVID positive and you have no electricity and no running water, right now, broadband, Wi-Fi, and virtual schooling is kind of the last thing on your needs list. And that is where the state and the nation should be planning for our children. You know, so many of our tribal nations have signed treaties, and those treaties have been broken over and over and over. And what it takes is true leadership. I want to quote Joe Biden and say, having a spine of steel and getting our children ready for being leaders in this democracy. That's what it's going to take. And hundreds of years ago, you know, our warriors, I'm a veteran, our warriors were armed with bows and arrows and tomahawks. Today it is the pen. Today it is the computer. Today it is the cell phone. And you see that right now with the effects of the George Floyd and his death, his murder. You know, there's justice in these technology, and our children are our leaders going forward. Right now, we can train them, like I said at the beginning of the program, but it also takes educating them and arming them with knowledge. Knowledge is power. And we have to work together, not only at the school board level, superintendent level, but the county, and then on up to the legislature. And the legislators, we need the support of the tribes. We need the support of the parents, the teachers. You know, the Red for Ed movement was wonderful here in the urban area, Maricopa County, and it trickled out to the urban and rural areas where I think people had a hard time organizing and seeing the vision. But we need to be really educating ourselves about where we need to put our voices for our children. And right now it is, you know, as a member of the minority caucus in the Senate and the legislature, I'm the whip for the Democrats in the Senate. But, you know, we have a uphill battle with the numbers being 13 and 17. And hopefully we do see that flip there, because right now, when the last time I set foot in the Senate and I was casting my last vote on May 8th, only the minority caucus wore masks. I wore masks, we wore gloves, and what kind of message does that send to our children? And so with the whole using money for private schools, I myself have I am a product of a private school, but that was not public money. And right now our children are being, public school education, teachers, all that funding is being put on a back burner while people support privatization, empowerment scholarships that have no oversight. And they're using our Native American children, just like what happened at the border of New Mexico and Arizona and in Window Rock and San Benito. That's a chink, and that's letting privatization, having that toe in the door right there, and then who knows where it's going to go. So we really need to get this in control and work together with our school boards. And I want to give a shout out to the folks that like Joe Thomas has been doing these Facebook Lives and those kind of things. And we really need to educate ourselves and our local and tribal leaders on what is happening, because a lot of people do not know, these programs like No Child Left Behind. That's like kind of like the Department of Truth, where their business is dishonesty, so that kind of thing. So we really need to help each other in supporting what is right for public education. And that goes all the way up to the federal level. And I know you're the experts on this, and I'll let you talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I totally agree. Again, it's about education. And so, as I mentioned before, I've worked to educate school board members, superintendents, principals, teachers, parents, and our children through various programs that I have run and will continue to run. But I shouldn't say but, what I have seen is that it definitely takes collaboration and partnership and everybody working together, everybody getting the same message so that everybody is on the same page and knows where they're coming from. So although Senator didn't talk specifically about some of the things such as the lack of equity or discipline rates, perhaps that's something that would be better addressed, or not better addressed, but addressed, like she said. You're there, you're working with the students, you're working with your administrators. So Dr. Trujillo, from your perspective as a district superintendent, are there any specific items or activities that people can do to help alleviate some of these inequities? You're on mute as well. Sorry.
5 months now using Zoom since we closed down. I still can't get the mute thing.
That's all right.
When I look at our work with Pasquayaki and Tohono nations, there were 3 things that we wanted to do immediately when our administration came into office a few years ago. Number 1, recognize the historical pain points of those 2 nations with the school district, and acknowledge that the school district hadn't always made the right decisions, even prior to when we got there, from closing down their schools that they were proud of during the recession, cutting bus lines, cutting off language programs that were once available. And so I think that number 1 is establishing relationships. You've got to establish those relationships. You have got to acknowledge that there is historical, and with good reason, there is historical cynicism to the local, state, and federal institutions that are charged with serving the nations. And you have to acknowledge that. And I think that's the first step before you do anything else. If you're sort of in a board member role or you're in a superintendent role. The second thing is you cannot get caught up in the symptoms: truancy, ditching, academic failure, drug abuse, behavior problems, suspensions, overrepresentation in special education programs. These are symptoms of a larger disease that, if you're in a leadership position, you're charged with curing the disease, not banging your head up against the wall with the symptoms. And that disease has always been, at least in my experience now, has been a lack of access and opportunity and resource deployment in systems that are big like TUSD. So when we got down to it and started looking at why our outcomes were so significantly worse than other segments of our student body, we looked at 3 really big leverage points that have really helped us in the last 3 years of our work with both of these nations. Number 1 is universal access to high quality pre-K. It all starts there. When you look at the differences between Native American students that have had high quality pre-K, and I'm not talking about childcare, I'm talking about high quality early childhood education. And what that means is that the children in those programs get the very earliest exposure to the most basic skills necessary to start to become literate. They get the earliest exposure to the written word, to letters, to phonics, to sounds. They get the earliest exposure possible to skills necessary for proficiency in numeracy, what will become math, okay? How to work with numbers, what numbers represent. And they get the very earliest exposure to skills that are crucial for socio-emotional competency and development, sharing, collaboration, communication. When you have children that have access to high quality pre-K instruction, their outcomes are significantly better by 3rd grade. It starts there. We've been able to not wait for our families on the Pascoyaqui Reservation or out in cells where we serve the Tohono not waiting for them to conquer the barrier of long distances of travel, but actually having our staff set up shop out there. We have the beautiful Southwest Center, the Southwest Community Center that sits right at the entrance of the Pascoyaqui community. And it's a walk for our families to get access, to sign up for our preschool programs, to get tested for gate services for gifted and talented, to have access to special education programming. So you've got to make the access points very easy, very accessible, and you have to be able to deliver that access and meet the parents and the families where they're at. The second thing, and we are blessed with, is advocacy. Having systemic advocacy for the students and the families. We are blessed with having an amazing Native American Student Services Department led by our director, Roxanne B. James, who's also a proud member of the Navajo Nation. She does an absolutely wonderful job with a team of advisors, Native American student success specialists. Their job is to go out into the communities and to help parents and families navigate the structures of school, understand what the resources are available in the buildings, not waiting for families to walk in because there's that historical cynicism about the institution that's supposed to serve me. But when we have our student success specialists, when you have a team, when you have a structure and a system that teaches families how to go in and advocate and what are the structures, what is a counselor responsible for, what is online learning, what are credit recovery programs and how can your kid get access, what is the AccuPlacer test that's given at Choya High School so that your son or daughter can get into Pima Community College. These are all those access points inside of a school that if we don't have advocates that are actively teaching and mentoring parents and showing them where these access points are, they're going to be resources untapped. The advocates are also there for discipline. Our Native American Student Services Department, they're in every single hearing, every single disciplinary hearing with every Native American student, making sure that those students are being treated equitably, that those students are being provided the interventions that we require, and not just being suspended. We've been able to drive down exclusionary disciplinary rates in Tucson Unified, especially with middle school through high school, by having these systems in place. And so I think it's not just about providing the high quality pre-K experience. It's not just about providing a system for advocacy inside of the larger system and teaching families and community members how to navigate the tools of the district that's supposed to be there and work for them. But then the other, I think, crucial piece is cultural responsiveness. And cultural responsiveness is not just heroes and holidays. It's not just putting some posters up. It's not just celebrating holidays, but it's an actual systemic implementation of curricular activities, instructional activities that are systemic across the system that acknowledge and celebrate the culture of the Native American students that we serve. One of our proudest achievements in this administration is the initiation of Yoemi language, or otherwise known as Yaqui language, at Choya High School. We now have a full-on Yoemi language program that the high school that serves the largest percentage of Pascua Yaqui students, they can go right in now and take it as a foreign language. It's a wonderful opportunity. Our culturally responsive pedagogy and instruction department, they're in the middle of a 2-year program of developing a full slate of Native American studies program courses that will cover the history and the celebrations and the pain of the 500 nations in this continent, and do it in a comprehensive way. Because in Tucson Unified, my deal has been, we will bring back Mexican American studies at the same time that we bring forward Native American studies, and give our Native American students the same opportunities that our Latinx kids had for many, many years under a nationally renowned Mexican American studies program that was widely celebrated and successful before, of course, the tragedy of the state of Arizona and suspending the program. So I think that cultural awareness piece and responsiveness piece is absolutely huge, and we're not done. I think the toughest part of that is also cultural responsive professional development for the entire system. And that's something we're struggling with, because the other two pieces were a little easier. We can get language classes going. We can develop classes. We can develop courses. But now taking every employee in the system, from your bus drivers to your custodians to your front office employees to your administrators to your teachers to your counselors, and getting into concepts like privilege and white privilege and implicit bias. This is not easy. It's not easy, and it's not easy to do on a systemic basis, but it is the necessary work that if we're truly going to change the system and create environments, not just classrooms, but offices. It's not just about the classrooms where the students walk into and need to feel welcome. It's about those offices. It's about the principal's office, the registration offices, where our Indigenous parents need to be able to walk in and not feel like they're being treated less than, feel like they're an equal partner with the school. So that would be my take in terms of if I'm talking to a fellow superintendent or a board member about where you want to go in terms of trying to change the course of some of these disturbing gaps in achievement that we've seen around the state with Native American students.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. As you know, as everybody knows, we're going through big changes in this country. Hopefully they're changes, and it's not just another, blip, so to speak, on our fight for racial equality among all races in this country. And I think we've gotten a lot of good attention, as Senator Peshlakai mentioned. Our social media, the internet, is helping along with this. When we see injustices, now people can see them immediately when they're happening and react to them and protest or do whatever they feel like they can do to make sure these things don't continue to happen. And as you know, historical trauma is a big issue among Native Americans. I did a series recently through Save Our Schools Arizona on how private school vouchers hurt reservation schools and reservation students. And a lot of that presentation focused on boarding schools. So a lot of our historical trauma has to deal with our ancestors being forced off the reservations or from their homelands and going into boarding schools where they dealt with trauma, physical, emotional, mental, etc. So a lot of people aren't aware of our history. So it is very important for our history and our culture to be shared, and for people, again, at all levels in our education system to be aware of these things so that they can be enlightened and they can then therefore respond to that and how to get past those challenges. So Brian, or or Mr. Garcia. I've been saying senator and doctor, so perhaps I should say Mr. Garcia. As a governing board member in the Tempe School District, how would you respond, or how have you responded to some of the concerns that Dr. Trujillo was just mentioning? What have you guys been doing to help your Native and other children at risk in that school district?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Nadine. So first of all, Superintendent Trujillo hit everything right on the dot. I mean, that is kind of what we strive to do, right? The gold standard. And it's really tough because while we have Guadalupe, which the Pascuaca tribe is a part of, and the Gila River Indian community, and obviously, Native students from all of the 22 tribes in Arizona and beyond, it's really tough to kind of provide the perspective on why it's important that we talk about discipline and the impact on Native students, the curriculum. How does the funding piece and mechanism go into play? Because there hasn't been much visibility or advocacy on this front. Our Guadalupe mayor, Mayor Molina, also serves as the head of our Indian Ed program. And so she juggles a lot of hats in this capacity, and she really tries her best to make sure that she's able to provide that support that Superintendent Trujillo was mentioning. But without the funding, we don't have the sufficient support and the sufficient staff to go out and make sure that we're doing check-ins with our families, that they have a person that they can reach out to in times of need. That they can ask the questions about technology and access to internet and curriculum, all the stuff that they need to be successful. And so when we're talking about kind of the decline in funding, while the federal government has a trust responsibility with our tribes and a duty to provide that funding, they shouldn't be the only ones. And which is why I'm really proud to Senator Peshlakai is also pushing for additional funding, because that should also be supported by our state, in addition to our own individual districts. Our budget process came back up, and one of the things that kind of stood out to me as a governing board member is kind of the same number of funding for our Indian Ed program, which is, there are a lot of things obviously that go into the budget process, but that was the one thing that I really strive to raise awareness around, because of our students that have a decline in obviously their academics, the impact in discipline, and the overall well-being of our Native students. And so when it comes to that, I think it's critically important that we have those open conversations, and we challenge our fellow school board members and superintendents and state leaders as to why this is important. Because when we're looking and we're striving to provide education to all of our students, and as a public school district, we're, the highest quality free education that we can provide, that needs to include our Native students, and they cannot be forgotten. I grew up in the Tempe Union High School District, in Tempe Elementary and the Tempe Union High School District. I was an ELL student. I struggled multiple times trying to figure out the difference between Spanish, English, and even Yaqui language at times. But if it wasn't for some of my teachers that went out of their way to say, hey, I know that you're able to do this, and here are the interventions, and here are the things that we can do to support you, I would not be where I am. I beat the statistics of graduating high school, going to college, getting a master's, or even graduating from law school on path to become an attorney. Like that does not happen. And so as often as we need it to be for the advocacy that we need. And it all ties into how do we work with our tribes and the relationship that we have with them. Superintendent Trujillo really touched on the topic of you need to have that trust in that relationship. For us, it's been a little challenging because while the main two tribes that we work with are Pascuaca and Gila River, we have a wide variety of students from other nations too. And so we want to make sure that we're providing that. And recently, this past year, we entered into an agreement with Gila River, where essentially we provide space for one of their coordinators at one of our schools that keeps track of Gila River students. And that creates the trust within our district, but also allows them to provide the support that they know that their students need, that we are lacking in. And so continuing to have the government-to-government relationships and consultations is critically important, because that helps each district and school and alongside the tribes to actually have and understand what the unique challenges are that vary between Navajo, Gila River, Pasquayaki, and et cetera, and other tribes. And so that is very, very critical as to how we continue building that. And I think that's a challenge that we need to ensure that our superintendents and our school board members understand alongside the other responsibilities. And then with regard to curriculum, obviously, we always strive to have inclusive, accurate, and reflective curriculum. I think it's also part of our job to work with tribes to create that curriculum and to tell particularly the story in Arizona and how our 22 tribes in Arizona have come to drive that history. And one of the things that I have done through the law school is a program that we call Pipeline to Law, because we know that, as I mentioned before, that Native students can succeed and can achieve high levels. They just need the supportive environments to get there. And one of the things that we strive to do is plant the seed that they can be advocates in their own community and beyond, whether it is an attorney or an educator or other fields that they are passionate about and can see themselves in. And in this Pipeline to Law, what we do is essentially simulate a kind of a court where the students have to argue one side or the other. And one of the particular issues is whether Native students should be able to wear an eagle feather at graduation and their Native regalia. Obviously, we've had split districts as to where they fall on that, and we see lawsuits, and then we see others like TST who embrace it and really honor that. And so these students they pick a side and they have to argue one side or the other. And the moment that you start talking about the culture and the nature and the upbringing of Native students, they light up. They know exactly what they want to say. They know exactly how to argue it and how to present it to their fellow classmates to a degree that they can understand. And these are, elementary students, 4th to 5th grade, and middle school students from 6th to 8th that you see light up. And in situations where I have been an opportunity to work with and teach these students, and other times if it's not something that they can see themselves in or understand or relate to, it's a different world, right? Some shut down, some don't want to engage. But when you have the curriculum and you have the reflective and inclusiveness in that curriculum, Native students engage. Native students want to be a part of the discussion and truly provide the perspective that they grew up with. And so I think that is critical as we continue to develop curriculum and make sure that they have a seat at the table and that we're talking with them as we are looking ways to enhance our curriculum. And then with cultural competency, I think like Superintendent Trujillo mentioned, providing the development, professional development for our teachers and staff is essential. Oftentimes I find myself kind of providing a Native Ed 101, Indian Law 101 as to why certain things have shaped, our current systems and what those equities look like. I spend more time educating others on what that looks like rather than kind of targeting and pinpointing specific issues. And I think when we provide that support and that understanding, it empowers and helps our teachers and staff to meet our Native students where they are. And I think that will address some of the symptoms, obviously not all of them, of the discipline that we face. Like truancy, we know that it's not because students don't want to show up, but because they can't, because of transportation or other issues that come up, but they fall into that cycle, and then truancy gets exacerbated into the criminal justice system, and it just goes on and on and on. And I think we need to obviously take a step back and have a way to provide that support and that empowerment, because otherwise we're going to continue in this cycle, and that's not helpful to our Native students. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's, continuing to work with our Native communities and nations to see what it is exactly that they see as a benefit and an issue, and what they want to bring to us, and maintaining that relationship and that trust, because otherwise we're going to keep going in this cycle, and that's not helpful for anyone.
Exactly. So what I'm hearing, themes that I'm hearing are cultural responsiveness, collaboration, partnerships, acknowledging what's behind all of the, excuse me, all of the symptoms of why our Native students don't do as well as others do, needing funding, resources, needing more training, needing people to understand how to connect with Native students, how to incorporate Native culture into the curriculum, not underestimating our students, meeting them where they are, making what they're learning something they can connect to, they can understand, relate to, and get engaged with. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. We don't have a lot more time right now. I knew we'd probably get through one question, which is about what we've done, but such a rich conversation. I really appreciate the perspectives of all of you. I think possibly our next topic, we'll go back to Senator Peshlakai briefly. We only have a few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of mention something that you, Senator, kind of touched on very briefly, is that we need support from the nation, Navajo Nation. All tribes need support from their tribal councils and the decision makers. And in my experience, working with the tribes in Arizona, we have 22 tribes, just in case people who are listening didn't realize that. We have one of the largest populations of Native American students in the country. And you also talked about the fact that right now during COVID, it makes all of these things that we've been talking about an even bigger challenge to deal with. And so I did a survey on behalf of Save Our Schools Arizona and Sienna, the nonprofit that I run, to find out what challenges our people were having, and in particular, what basic needs are they missing, like water and electricity. And we also asked about internet connectivity because, as you said, our parents don't want to send their kids to school where they might get sick and come back and make everybody else sick. We already know there's a very high rate of COVID cases and deaths on the Navajo Nation. So we've been working to try to get those needs met, and working with some wonderful graduate students at Arizona State University on trying to provide these things to them. So what we're finding though too is through the CARES Act, a lot of money is going out to reservations, Navajo Nation included, but that the processes, the procedures, the politics, all of those things are really slowing down the implementation or the use of these funds and directing the funds toward where they're really needed. So don't want to ask the question now because we don't have time to address such a huge topic, but I'm thinking perhaps our next Indigenous perspectives could be focused on what elected leaders, school administrators, and tribal leaders can do to remove the barriers from our students getting the education that they so deserve and so need. And as Brian and the rest of you mentioned, we can achieve, Native people can achieve at very high levels and have achieved at very high levels. We have astronauts, we have lawyers, doctors, engineers, politicians, and we need to educate. Educate is the bottom line in my case, because you hate to assume that people don't care. I think once they do know and they are aware that you'll find out that they care. They just don't know. And so, as I said, we're running out of time. I want people to know that We have another presentation coming up. I will be, again, moderating a panel of 2, this time on our Speaking of Schools series. It's called Achieving Equity for Indigenous Students, and that will be on July 29th at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. Navajo time. And I'll be speaking with Superintendent Dr. Deborah Dennison from San Carlos Unified School District and Mr. Quincy Nate from Chinle Unified School District. And we'll get their perspectives on equity for Indigenous students, what that means, how to achieve it, can it be achieved, and especially again in light of being in a pandemic at this time. So people can get more information about Save Our Schools Arizona at our SOS AZ network, and we will have more Facebook Live discussions, not just Indigenous perspectives, but others as well. So I just really want to thank everybody again for participating today. And it was enjoyable. I would love to meet up with you all again at some other point. And if you need anything from me, our Sienna provides trainings and all of the different things that you've talked about. Like I said before, from school board down to individual students and every which way, including legislators. So thank you again. Well, I have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any final words that they'd like to say in 2 minutes? Senator Peshlakai.
Thank you, Nadine. I think it's all about education, and it is throughout our lives. And I find that much of my work as a legislator is educating my colleagues about the history of the Native Americans and reminding them that they are on Native American sacred land, homelands, and teaching with kindness and sharing our culture and taking everything that we've learned and from the educators like you and my teachers from Head Start on the Navajo Nation all the way up to my master's degree, and hearing from Brian Garcia and Gabriel Trujillo and yourself. It's all about education. It all comes back, and every day is another learning experience, and we just need to approach everybody to be reaching out a hand to help one another up. So I just wanted to say that, and I appreciate the Facebook Live and all that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, everybody. And we'll talk again soon, hopefully.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Take care.